Activists on the ground in Glasgow have a clear message for world leaders heading there. The planet is on fire, and their main role is to meet the urgency of the moment. In a week that the UN Environment Programme released its latest emissions gap report, pointing to commitments that, if fully implemented, will see a global temperature rise of 2.7 degrees Celsius, in a word, catastrophic.
As the title of this year's report puts it, the heat is on. And as the contents of the report show, the leadership we need is off. And far off. We know that humanity's future depends on keeping global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2030. And we also know that so far, parties to the Paris Agreement are utterly failing to keep this target within reach. And the report also shows that countries are squandering a massive opportunity to invest COVID-19 fiscal and recovery resources in sustainable, cost-saving, planet-saving ways.
He urged world leaders to arrive in Glasgow with bold, time-bound, front-loaded plans to reach net zero carbon emissions. Key to that, phasing out fossil fuels and coal in particular.
To decarbonize every sector, from power to transport, farming and forestry, to phase out coal by 2030 in OECD countries and 2040 in all others, to end all coal investment, public and private, national and international, to end subsidies for fossil fuels and polluting industries, to put a price on carbon, and to channel that back to creating green jobs. And obviously, to provide at least $100 billion each year to the developing world for climate finance.
The science around climate change is overwhelming. One merely needs to look out the window to witness nature's thunderous roar. Raging bushfires from California to Cape Town, droughts, floods and cyclones. Such extreme weather that causes billions of dollars in damage annually, often in some of the poorest regions of the world. Melting glaciers are adding to the rising sea levels, increasing coastal erosion while affecting the natural habitats of animals like polar bears, as carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere push the globe closer and closer to the point of no return. With small island states among the most vulnerable.
On ocean, this is an area that of critical importance to us in the Pacific for obvious reasons. We're surrounded by it. It links all our countries together, but there are also implications. The nexus between climate change and sea level rise will have implications for our small island states in the future in terms of loss of statehood as well as sovereignty, erosion of our maritime zone, etc.
This video from the UN Development Programme shows a talking dinosaur sharing its experience with the General Assembly in going extinct.
At least we had an asteroid. What's your excuse? You're headed for a climate disaster, and yet every year governments spend hundreds of billions of public funds on fossil fuel subsidies. Imagine if we had spent hundreds of billions per year subsidizing giant meteors. That's what you're doing right now.
As financing becomes a key peg of the global climate agenda, $100 billion annually to address the needs of developing countries that simply cannot foot the bill themselves.
The finance that we need, moving from combustion engine to electric-powered vehicles, moving away from coal and planting trees to give us back the lung that our planet needs. So there's a gap there. And we do need the money. And I want to emphasise this because we made the commitment, as you know, in Paris to raise $100 billion. We haven't quite got there. We think we'll get there late 22, early 2023. We'll continue to do our best to raise that money. We've seen pledges from the US alongside our own pledge, the UK, and a pledge from the EU and many other pledges coming forward. But the most important thing, I think, is to continue focusing on the money, but also to adapt our business models so that we can really get the money out of the door.
With recent analysis showing that the world would need 7 times the ambition to keep the 1.5 degrees goal on track. A yawning gap that must be closed within the next 8 years and deliver the cuts in emissions commensurate to the need.
If you look at any corner of the planet, it is super clear that we are in a full-blown climate emergency. From wildfires in the US to flooding across the world, we are in a full-blown climate crisis. World leaders know this, they've seen what's happening. Now's the time for them to come together here in Glasgow and hammer out a deal to avert the worst of the climate catastrophe.
And with the G20 also meeting this weekend in Rome, Italy, a group representing 80% of global emissions, a message that they must do the most.
If there is no meaningful reduction of emissions in the next decade, we will have lost forever the possibility of reaching 1.5 degrees. So this is a moment of truth, and I will be joining the G20 next weekend, and I will be strongly appealing for all of them to do their maximum. There is a principle of national determined, common but differentiated responsibilities according to national capabilities, which means that the leadership must come from developed countries, but the level of emissions of the emerging economies is such that we also need the emerging economies to go an extra mile. Only if everybody does the maximum, it will be possible to get there.
With this world-renowned naturalist adding his voice to the growing chorus that catastrophe looms if the can is again kicked down the road.
I think it would be really catastrophic if the developed nations of the world, the more powerful nations of the world, simply ignored these problems. Do we say, oh, it's nothing to do with us and cross our arms? We caused it. The question is, on a world scale, when is it too late? But it's difficult to see. If we don't act now, it will be too late. And we've been saying that for a long time, and we're saying, well, what do we mean by now? And we've said, well, in the next 10 years or something, and think, oh, well, 10 years' time, that's a couple of budgets away, and you know, politicians won't do things. We have to do it now.
And if his word isn't enough, maybe it'll take a dinosaur to make the closing argument.
Let me be real for a second. You've got a huge opportunity right now. As you rebuild your economies and bounce back from this pandemic, this is humanity's big chance. So here's my wild idea. Don't choose extinction. Save your species before it's too late. It's time for you humans to stop making excuses and start making changes. Thank you.
Sherman Bryceby's SABC News, New York.